Okay, so the theme they've given us here today is to evaluate cattle based on functional efficiency and just some of the basics of what to look for. And I'm going to tie functional efficiency to profitability, okay? And profitability is sustainability. So in order for us to keep doing what we do, we need profitable animals, and I'm going to try and tie that phenotypically to try and tie profitability and functional efficiency and sustainability together. So we're going to use these as props, but I just want to lay a foundation first with some of the philosophies that I look for when I'm evaluating livestock. So the first thing is we need cattle that can eat, walk, and reproduce. Okay, that's basic fundamentals. We don't pass begin unless we've got those established. So by eat, you look at the muzzles and jaws. By walk, you look at the feet and legs, upper skeleton. And then by reproduce, you look at the hormonal balance, sexual organs, and then the secondary sexual traits. Then I think it's essential to focus on the four most important economic traits in a cattle operation. Okay, so those are adaptability. If an animal's not adapted to its environment, it can't express its genetics correctly. So that is the gateway trait into breeding profitable livestock. And then the next one is functional efficiency. So with functional efficiency, we need cattle that have got balance physiologically and in their endocrine system. And that allows cattle to be fertile. And fertility is the number one profit driver when evaluating livestock. Now, in a cattle operation, the other big profit drivers that might be even more important are things like stocking rate and the way you manage and rotate your pastures, etc. But for animals themselves, the number one driver is fertility. And following that is longevity. So how long we can keep cattle in the herd for, because it's very expensive to replace a female. Growing out a heifer is an expensive exercise. You've got an animal that you're feeding and keeping alive that's not giving you anything until she calves for the first time. So you'll notice, are there any auctioneers around here? Because I don't want to upset anyone. Jamie. So the auctioneers, they're never going to mention those traits when an animal comes in the ring. They're not going to talk about fertility and functional efficiency and longevity and adaptability. But what they would talk about are things like muscle, milk, growth, marbling. Now, as important as those traits are, they're actually totally irrelevant if you don't first lay the foundation with those aforementioned traits. And I think that's maybe where as breeders we get to the point where we start ignoring the fundamentals and we jump straight into what I call the turnover traits, which is like how much muscle an animal's got or how much milk she's got, how much growth, and if you've got a quality-based grading system, how much marbling they've got. Then it's important, I think, to realize that quality cattle come in very different shapes and sizes and colors. So making them gray or blue or red is very easy. Making them big and little is easy. Making them polled and horned is easy. The art of breeding cattle is in making functionally efficient, profitable cattle, okay? So then I'll have a philosophy that I'll put out today and that I think is appropriate, but still, as breeders, you have to decide whether my philosophy or the animal that I propose fits your objectives, because everyone's got different objectives, fits your resources, everyone's got different resources, and fits your environment. And that's your climate and your management practices, okay? So there's a lot of context and nuance involved in this, but the fundamentals apply. It doesn't matter if you've got dairy cows or beef cows or tropically adapted beef cows or even recreation cattle, whether it's rodeo cattle or show cattle, beasts of burden. Adaptability, functional efficiency, fertility, longevity are still the profit drivers in all those different industries, okay? Anyone disagree or want to criticize or comment, or add something? Okay. Then we talk about balance, and balance I think is essential to cover because it's a word that we all use a lot and it's very seldom qualified. balance to me is several things. The first thing, well, it's a word we use like equity or sustainability. It's just we throw it out there, and we can make it mean whatever we want it to mean. But balance, I think, needs to be defined in the context of cattle breeding. So it's a balance. It's a physiological balance. So all the body parts fit together appropriately in the right proportion. It's a balance of the endocrine system. So the glands are functioning correctly, releasing hormones at the right level, and that's expressing itself in the animal's phenotype. And then it's a balance between muscle, which is the product we produce, and fat, the energy it takes to produce that muscle. In females, estrogen makes fat, so we want a fat muscle balance. We want easy fleshing females with enough muscle but no coarseness, no extreme muscle definition. We need them feminine and ladylike. And then in the bulls, it's a muscle-fat balance. So with bulls, you want testosterone makes muscle, so you want a lot of muscle, but you still need that fat, that easy fleshing ability, that high inherent body condition for reproductive purposes, and for durability on pasture. Then you need hormonal balance. So we need our females to be feminine, ladylike, faces like Jennifer Aniston, bums like Jennifer Lopez, and then we need that estrogen flow flowing through them. So they need to be refined and silky-hided and nothing coarse about them, no coarse muscle or bone or joints. And then with the bulls, we want bulls that are masculine with punch and grunt, with testicle size and shape, with a lot of muscle tone and muscle shape to them. So that creates a situation called, let's start on the opposite. A lot of the performance guys who push for growth and carcass primarily will end up with a herd where you can't really find the bull between the females. You know, they all look a lot the same. And that's called sexual monomorphism. That happens when you propagate growth hormones and not sex hormones. What we're looking for in all mammals is sexual dimorphism. Okay, so that's when the bull and the females look nothing alike, like a Nyala bull and a Nyala ewe. They're the same species, but they look nothing alike. And that happens from propagating sex hormones. So that's breeding for reproduction first and for fertility. And why that happens is the growth hormones, you start with growth hormones, that lengthens the long bones, and they only stop when the sex hormones only start when the growth hormones stop, when those long bones ossify. So the longer you propagate long bones to make more growth, more muscle, the more you delay the sex hormones, and you make subfertile, later maturing cattle. So I know a lot of you guys do follow Kit Pharaoh on YouTube, and he's got a very good saying where when three ladies are sitting together on a couch, their hips are touching. When three men are sitting together on the couch, their shoulders are touching. That's sexual dimorphism, and that's what we're trying to get out of these animals if we want them to be profitable. Like, your objectives might not be profitability, then what I'm saying means nothing. But if you actually want to be profitable, then that's how we need these animals to be. Okay, so then we've spoken about balance. I think body type and fertility, let's tie those together. So my thesis would be that fertility is highly heritable, and it's made up of two main components. The one is hormonal balance, and the other one is high inherent body condition. So an easy fleshing animal, in the female sense that is feminine, is fertile. So if you think of all your cows back home, your older cows that have been productive their whole lives, your most productive old cows are full-bodied, easy fleshing cows, and they are feminine. Okay, so they've got hormonal balance and high inherent body condition. And they produce offspring that are like they are. Easy fleshing cattle produce easy fleshing cattle, and the cattle that are feminine produce feminine daughters. The bulls that are masculine produce feminine daughters, etc. So those traits are highly heritable, and those are the two main ingredients for fertility. So if you consider that fertility is a survival trait, it has to be highly heritable, and we can breed for it. Not many people breed for fertility. A lot of people breed against infertility or against subfertility, but not many people breed for fertility. And breeding for fertility is to focus on those core traits of fertility, which is an animal that's full-bodied and easy fleshing, an animal that's hormonally balanced, and then you're getting earlier maturing cattle that come into estrus earlier. The bulls are fertile at a younger age, and they maintain that fertility throughout their lives. You can feed for fertility. I mean, you can manage a subfertile herd to be fertile by throwing extra feed out, because fat is a key ingredient for fertility. So you can add that fat through a feed bucket, or you can breed it in genetically. I would advise, it's a lot cheaper and makes a lot more sense to breed it in genetically instead of feeding it in through a bucket. Now, my bias is also going to lean towards the earlier maturing, easier fleshing, and more practically framed cattle. So avoiding all the extremes and trying to find that practically framed animal. So there are several reasons for that. Now, that animal isn't necessarily the best performer in the feedlot, and it might not be the ideal animal for the abattoir either, because they're looking for maximum muscle, maximum growth, maximum feed efficiency in a confined area. Feed efficiency on grass is driven by body type. It's a full-bodied animal that's easy fleshing on grass is an efficient animal because it keeps reproducing, okay? So the reason I bias in that direction is several things. The first thing is those cattle come into estrus earlier. The bulls are fertile at a younger age. They forage better. The earlier maturing, easier fleshing cattle are non-selective grazers. So they put their heads down and they graze non-selectively. Your later leaner cattle that are later maturing, they tend to be a little more selective in the way they graze. This isn't a good way of managing your resource, your veld or your pastures. The next thing is they're better temperamented cattle. Your earlier maturing, easier fleshing cattle have got better temperaments. Temperament is a trait that needs. This is not a trait that needs to be taken lightly anymore. With the scarcity of labor, the age of our producers, we can't really tolerate bad temperaments anymore. So that definitely propagates that. And temperament is not just a convenience trait; it's actually an essential profitability trait. And then these cattle, from an eating experience, when the steak hits the plate, because they've got that extra fleshing ability and fattening ability, it's a better eating experience because flavor comes from fat. So those are the arguments for this type of easy fleshing, earlier maturing cattle. So all over the world, I often get asked, what size should a cow be? What is the ideal size for a cow? And I mean, obviously, every area is going to give you a different weight and a different frame. But I've come up with a metric that I think is useful if you use the philosophy and not necessarily the numbers. You can add your numbers the way you see it. So if I throw a number out there, I'm not saying that that's gospel. I'm saying just use that as a framework and bring your number in. So it's a 7-step process. The first step being nutritionally, don't starve your cattle and don't spoil them. Like, see what the good commercial farmers are doing in your area from a nutritional standpoint and with providing supplements, etc., and follow that routine and that schedule. The second thing is to get these animals calving at a certain age. Now, in some places in the world, that's 2 years old. In other places in the world, it's 3 years old. And depending on where you are and the way you're farming, whether you're calving at 2 or calving at 3, then you set it at that level. The third point is you have a very defined breeding season. So maybe if you haven't got a breeding season yet, you shorten it to say 90 days to start, and eventually, as you religiously apply this, you can bring it down to 65 days, and some guys have brought it down to 45 days with success. But you need a defined breeding breeding season. Then at the fourth point is that needs to happen every year. So no holidays, no skips. You do that every single year at the same time, so your cows are calving on time and every year. The fifth point is you want to define a minimum weaning weight that's acceptable for your program. So that, again, depending on where you are and what your objectives are, that's going to differ. But let's say, for example, it's 220 kilos wherever you are. That's your minimum acceptable weaning weight. You establish that. In order for those cows to stay in that cycle, that they have to bring in a 220 kg weaner, okay? Sixth point is you want your calves to be at least 45% of their mother's weight at 7 months old. So what establishing a minimum weaning weight does is stops your cows from getting too small. Because we can go too small. I mean, then you just switch over to sheep and goats and it's a lot more profitable. So I think the answer is in the middle. The 45% minimum stops your cows from getting too big. And I think 50% is about optimum. When you start running towards 60, it's great that year, but often your cows will struggle to fall back in calf for that next year. Point 7, if you do those 6 steps, after 3 or 4 years, every single cow that's left on your farm is the right size. Now, it's radical if you do it and you're culling everything that doesn't fit into those 7 steps, but maybe a tagging system where you just tag the cows that do that every year, and that becomes your bull mothers. So your bulls or your replacement heifers you keep come out of that nucleus. And I've seen amazing examples of like, for example, in Brazil, there's a Nelore herd that sells 600 bulls a year called Naviraí. And they semen testing all their bull calves at 9 months old just to check for live sperm. Anything that has live sperm qualifies to be a stud bull for them. And they're exposing all their heifers at 15 months to calve at 2 for the first time. And the ones that do that become the bull mothers. And the ones that do that again at 3, as long as they keep producing. Now, I remember in the Eastern Cape, my dad used to tell me that they used to argue back in the 60s and 70s. Some of the guys were only exposing their cows to calve every second year. So they would deliberately skip their cows because they said in those mountains, in those environments, you couldn't calve every year. Okay, well, the guys in those environments now are easily calving every year, and they're getting 90% plus conception rates. So a lot of what we think is impossible now is maybe the next frontier. And I think that the discussion about calving at 2 and then again at 3, I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's something that we need to all do tomorrow, but I think it's something we are going to have to figure out as margins get tighter and to improve profitability in cattle, is to find ways to calve these cows at 2 and then move on from there. Normally, this is when I get my first shot. I get shot in the leg normally when I say that. But it is a conversation. It's definitely a conversation that I think we need to have. Is there any comments until we get on? Then we'll get on to the actual physiology and body parts of the cattle. Any questions or comments? Or let's start with the skulls on these females. So we need width in the muzzle, and we need a strong jaw. Okay, that's essential for foraging and grazing. That width of the muzzle correlates with the width between the pin bones. It's exactly the same width. So if you want genuine skeletal width in your cattle, you need a wide muzzle and a strong jaw to start. The length of the skull is very important. So that length of the skull will determine maturity pattern. So your shorter skulls are early maturing, your longer skulls are later maturing. You want some width between the eyes, especially when you get to the bulls. You see they'll have a little bit more width between the eyes. And that's very good, again, for tenderness of carcass, for temperament. The more narrow you make a skull and the higher and smaller you get the eye, the more you're going to get a temperament that's less than ideal in your cattle. Those of you with horses would have seen this with your horses. The wildest horses are the ones with a small eye right at the top of their head. That width between the eyes also just indicates, again, it's skeletal width all the way through. So, and you're getting an earlier maturing animal. It's going to correlate with fertility. It's going to correlate with temperament and then with tenderness in the carcass. With these females, like this red female in front of me, you want a nice flat neck and a smooth shoulder. That's just showing you estrogen flow and it's showing you femininity. And you want a silky glean on these cattle, like on their necks. You'll see the red heifer here, that grey heifer over there. The other grey heifer, they're really silky on their necks. This blue heifer gets a little more coarse in her hair coat and in her neck. And you can see she also doesn't quite have the body condition that the two greys and the red have got. So she would be phenotypically right now less fertile than the other three, because she's got less body condition and she's showing us less hormonal balance estrogen flow. The angle of the shoulders, this is really important for several reasons, guys. So you need angle from the top of the shoulder to the point of the shoulder. So like just where the middle of where the hump is down to the point of the shoulder, you want a good 45-degree angle. That allows these animals to move with more flexibility, so it helps with locomotion. That also allows the shoulder to be kept within the body wall so it doesn't protrude and get too bold. It's very important for calving time too. When that calf is born, if it's got good angle from its point of top of the shoulder to the point of the shoulder, there's a lot more flexibility for that calf to come through the birthing canal. And if you want good feet on your cattle, you need angle on your shoulder, because a straight shoulder is going to put extra pressure on the knee, so it bends that knee forward, creates a calf knee, and then the hoof, the foot of the animal, then will tend to either curl or splay out because of the pressure that's coming on top without any flexibility of the joints. If you think about your calves when they're born, none of them have got bad feet when they're born. All your calves have got good feet when they're born. So foot problems are actually upper skeleton problems. They come from your shoulder and they come from your hip structure. We need clean joints and flexible joints. So you want some cushion in your pasterns. You want some flexibility on your knee and some angle on your hock. This is all essential for athleticism. When you get behind the shoulder, you want that fullness of forerib or fullness of heart girth. So you want a smooth transition from the shoulder back into the forerib and a really big upper rib cage, and you want them deep and soft in their flank. That depth and softness in the flank, that just indicates high inherent body condition or easy fleshing ability. We were talking last night with Querbus, and I think a good way to establish your eye for easy fleshing ability is early in the spring, when you bring all your cattle in their contemporary groups, your fattest animals running under the same conditions in that contemporary group, that's your high inherent body condition or your easy fleshing ability. Your ones that are skinny are the ones that you start culling first. So if you're selecting heifers at the end of winter is a good time to do it in that early spring, and you just peel off the fattest ones. I mean, those are the ones that are going to be your good cows, provided they've got hormonal balance. Like a fat masculine one isn't necessarily ideal in what we're looking for. That upper rib cage, you want a lot of shape in your upper rib cage. Several reasons. The one is it's a platform for stacking your beef on, allows for a big ribeye, but also it creates volume for an internal dimension to put your organs in. So we had that outstanding talk about rumen function yesterday, and you saw how big that rumen was. We need a lot of heart girth, a lot of chest floor, and a lot of rib shape to fit those organs in, and that creates a good rumen function in these cattle. Maternal cattle have got depth of body and they've got a big sweep to their lower rib cage. The more terminal cattle that are made really just for feeding and killing, they get more cylindrical through their middle. Base width is important. When you get behind the cattle, you want some width at the base, and that shows you true skeletal width. The sexual organs are always going to correlate. So a female that's got a really feminine neck and head is going to have a larger, more pronounced vulva, and she's going to be slightly more refined in her teat size and more correct in her teat placing. As soon as you get a female that gets a little too prominent in her neck and a little coarse in her crest, she's going to get a little smaller in her vulva, and you'll see a little more coarseness and unevenness in the way her teats are spaced. The same with the bulls. I think, are there any Boergoat breeders here? Boergoat guys are good at this. They check all their rams for teats, and I think the bull guys, we're slowly going to need to start doing that too. We want those teats to be spaced just like a heifer's teats in front of the scrotum, so on the body wall. And that correlates with a good udder on our females. So all these females are none of them are in production yet, so I can't really get into showing you the actual udders now that the Bonsmaras have left. But with an udder, I think in beef cattle, we've maybe lagged behind a bit on udder quality, and udder quality is essential. It is the production line of the factory. So the cow's the factory, the udder is the production line. And we need to get that udder suspended above the hocks. We need that fore udder to attach into the body wall with some depth of fore udder. And then when you get behind the cattle, we want to see height and width in that rear udder because that gives you volume of milk, even though it's tightly suspended. That height and width, or the median suspensory ligament that pulls that udder up, if you think that 60% of a cow's milk is produced in its two rear quarters, only 40% in the fore quarters. So it's essential to have that rear udder volume and height and width. Then with the teat size and placement, we want teats that are adequately spaced. We don't want pendulous big teats. We don't want teats that are too small. Calf will struggle to latch onto them. Spacing is important, and definition of quarter. We need to see 4 definite quarters, but a very level udder floor underneath. I don't know if we need to chase those bulls up, but yes, sir, yeah. So these are tropically adapted cattle, guys. They're heat-tolerant, insect-resistant cattle. So in the talk earlier, they mentioned the slick gene. The slick gene is just one of several things that makes cattle tropically adapted. So let's start with the skin. Our Brahman-influenced cattle or Bosendicus-influenced cattle are always going to have a little bit more skin. This is essential for dissipating heat because the more skin an animal's got, the more sweat glands it's got, and the more ability it has to dissipate heat. So that dewlap and throat latch, that's the radiator, essentially, of the animal. Bosendicus cattle have more sweat glands per square inch than your Bos Taurus cattle. So they actually have 2 advantages when it comes to dissipating heat. They've got more sweat glands, more skin, which makes more sweat glands, and they've got more sweat glands per square inch. The next thing is they secrete more sebum than the Bos Taurus cattle do. And sebum is a substance, it's oily. You can, if you've worked with Brahman cattle, they leave a smell in the yards, in the working facility. That's the sebum. And that is insect repellent, and it can work as a sunscreen. So you've got that added advantage with them. The other thing that's fascinating about these Bosendicus cattle is they've got a subcutaneous muscle that can shake off an insect, a tick or a biting fly or a fly at any part of the body. They can shake just that part of the body with that subcutaneous muscle. Now, Bos Taurus cattle need to use their tongues or their tails to do that. So they conserve a lot of energy by having that subcutaneous muscle functioning. Body type on these cattle is also essential. Now, if you think of cattle animals, ruminants around the equator, they're all a lot more refined. You know, you've like, let's say a kudu, and then if you get more to the poles, you'll get more like a moose, you know, with a very big bone and big joints. So body type is also very essential for heat tolerance in the tropics. So bringing a moose type animal, like a big French Charolais type animal, to the equator is not going to be essential. I mean, it's not going to be optimum. And then hide color. So hide color plays a big part, and it's just simple physics. Black absorbs light, and red absorbs less light and reflects more. That silver gray color or honey color, that'll reflect more light and absorb even less color. Okay. In our savanna areas and low altitude areas, it's better to avoid black because black absorbs heat. But when you get to altitude, when you start getting to like 1,500 meters above sea level and your ultraviolet comes into play a lot stronger, then black actually becomes a positive color because it can absorb that ultraviolet and actually use it. And that's why if you've been to the beach and you've been skiing in the mountains or hiking like in the Drakensberg, you'll notice how much harsher the light is up in the Drakensberg. That ultraviolet is very harsh. So with our white-faced animals, so your Simmentaler, Simbra, Hereford type animals, it's essential to put pigment around the eyes. It acts as sunglasses to absorb some of that ultraviolet, and it really can relieve a lot of stress. And then on other extremities too, so on the muzzle, on the teats, on the testicles, etc. So pigment becomes very, very important. Now, I've seen a lot of arguments saying that, you know, a shiny coat reflects reflects light a lot better. So if you've got a black shiny animal, it's better than a red fuzzy animal. But that's not apples and apples. That's really a false argument. Like we're just talking physics here. So if you're going to compare a black shiny animal, compare it with a red shiny animal. If you're going to compare a red fuzzy animal, compare it with a black fuzzy animal. And these are little differences, but they definitely do make a difference. And if you think of all the areas in the world, like where these Indian cattle came from, that Indian subcontinent of Pakistan and India, there are no black cattle that have come from there. They're all red or white or grey. If you look at where black cattle came from, Drakensbergers, Angus, your dark Brownvie, Grauvi cattle up in the Alps, they're all altitude or very temperate northern cattle. The hooves themselves, we want heel depth, so the heel needs to be deep and the toes need to be equally sized and shaped with a little gap but not too much gap, and we need to avoid that curl, and we need to avoid these flat feet where the hooves grow out. When you feed cattle, hooves grow out quicker, obviously because of the nutrition. So as long as they're growing out symmetrically. Black hooves are stronger than lighter colored hooves simply because lighter colored nails or hooves grow quicker. That's the only reason. Black hooves don't grow as fast as lighter colored hooves. So they are more optimum for that reason. I think before we take some questions here, one of the biggest things that I try and stress is I think we need to avoid trying to break cattle down piece by piece and just look at the whole picture, like see the forest instead of the trees, because function correlates. So a functional animal is going to be right in most cases. And I think sometimes we make the mistake by looking for an animal that's got that one specific thing that you really like, and it might have 99 good points and one deal breaker that you avoid because the rest of it's right. But if you're looking at a forest, if there's a cow with a bad udder, it doesn't matter how good the rest of the body is. If there's a bull with bad testicles, it doesn't matter how bad the rest of the body is. If there's a cow with a parrot mouth or a monkey jaw, the monkey jaw is the overshot jaw, parrot mouth, undershot, it doesn't matter what the rest of the cow is. So I think let's look at the whole forest and not just try and break these cattle down one piece at a time like that. I don't think we need to get them up, but let's talk about the bulls. So number one is we want some muscle shape and tone on these bulls. We want neck muscling. We want character in the head. Okay. So when we get to the sexual organs on the sheath and cattle are cattle, and I'm agnostic to breeds. It doesn't matter what breed they are, as long as they're adapted and functionally efficient and fertile and live a long time. So with sheaths, I think, especially with our composites and our Bos Indicus cattle, there's a danger of tightening that sheath up too much because we can lose a lot of function and we tend to lose that fleshing ability sometimes. So we want a sheath that's got some angle to it, a 45-degree sheath, nice small prepuce opening, not too much navel in front of the sheath, and a bull that has control so he doesn't prolapse. Prolapsing is very difficult to analyze in these kind of circumstances because the cattle are excited and they're seeing different cattle for the first time, etc. But normally, if a bull's got a pendulous sheath and a big prepuce opening and he's prolapsing, he's probably going to prolapse anyway. With testicles, we want a short scrotum neck, a scrotal neck, testicles that are evenly sized and shaped, that get to 27.5 centimeters as quick as possible in their lives. That's when they stop shooting blanks. So you've got, that's not an optimum size. That's the starting point. Whatever mature size those testicles are going to get, you want them to get there as quick as possible because early fertility is essential. You want symmetry in the testicles with prominent epididymis. Now, in terms of similar to the cow's udders, you want the ligaments and the suspension for them to turn slightly backwards. A banana-shaped testicle leaning forward, you're going to have some issues with thermoregulation. I know the science points to there not being too much of an issue with swung testicles or a slight twist in the testicles. I just know that the more time I spend with the big herds around the world that are unimproved in terms of them trying to propagate something other than reproduction, the testicles are symmetrical on those cattle. They haven't bred for it; they've just been breeding for reproduction. So I think there is something to that. Swung testicles or twisted testicles are definitely an abnormality, and I think that speaking of thermoregulation again, you'll see bulls with a really long scrotal neck, and that's just lack of adaptability. So an animal that, and you can do it two ways. One is because it hasn't adapted and it's not adapting to the heat, it needs to lengthen its scrotal neck in order to thermoregulate better. So the longer the scrotal neck, the better it can thermoregulate, but that causes all kinds of issues with injury and etc. The other way you do it is by feeding them too much. I mean, if you feed an animal too much hot food, it's the same thing. The bull's going to need to lengthen his scrotal neck to thermoregulate better. So yeah, we need those testicles suspended. Sexual organs all need to be suspended above the hocks, basically. Yeah. Does that make sense?